What made you walk out of a date? Was on a date with a stunning girl, but turned out to be one of those people who are addicted to their phones. Called her out on it in a playful manner about her checking Instagram with me sitting right in front of her, and she got super defensive about it. Like way too much for what was said. And sat in silence for about 30 seconds, to which I stood up, took my jacket and said, "Well, lovely to meet you, but I've got to bounce." Took a gal to Starbucks, bought us both a drink so we could sit and talk. About 5 minutes into it she takes a phone call from a coworker, puts it on speakerphone and begins to savagely shit-talk everyone the two work with. On speakerphone, in a small semi-busy Starbucks, both parties cussing up a storm. The barista at the counter asked her to take the call off speaker as people were trying to study. They were. And she proceeds to argue with the barista about how she can't take it off speakerphone, blah blah blah. I instantly got up and apologized to the barista on my way out of the store. Didn't message her, didn't hear from her. Pretty much after greeting she was checking her phone the entire time and only talking about herself. Constantly interrupting me. She was blackout drunk before I got there. Back in college I was going on a date with this girl. She wanted me to meet her at her sorority house when I got off work around 8. I go there, she is blackout drunk on a couch and wanted to cuddle. I hadn't had anything to drink so I just left. The next day she asked me why I never showed up. We didn't talk anymore. I oversaw her texting her friend referring to me as a free dinner, so I took her to the shittiest, dirtiest greasy spoon-type place I could find and played the most uptight cheapskate asshole possible until she walked off. Then I went to my favorite Korean place. She had just come back from the bathroom, sat down and said, "I think black people should have different bathrooms." So I excused myself to the bathroom, and left. Edit. The amount of you who try and defend this girl's blatant racism is disgusting. She just kept talking about work endlessly. I tried to change topics by asking if she had any hobbies. Nope. Just ranted about how work wouldn't let her pursue any. Would just keep on talking about herself, how tired she was because of work, and basically made it seem like she was doing me a favor by coming out on this date, when she could have worked. She did not even ask me any questions. Every now and then would check her phone and would nod in, and, yeah, pretty much. I made up an excuse, and left. Had a date tell me in the restaurant that her boyfriend never takes her anywhere and the only reason she agreed to come out with me was to make him jealous. This was after we had ordered. Figured she had to call her boyfriend for assistance on that one. I was set up by an aunt of hers because, I think, I danced with old ladies at a wedding and her aunt must have thought I was nice. Anyways, girl really didn't seem interested in being there. I told her she didn't owe me anything and she shouldn't feel obligated to be here. I then explained lemon laws and applied it to dating. We paid for our own drinks and left without issue. From How I Met Your Mother. Barney came up with the lemon law, meaning you're allowed to walk out within the first 5 minutes of a date if it's obvious it's not going to work. I went on a date with a girl that brought her sister along. She didn't mention she would bring her. Went to a pub and got a drink, sat down next to this girl who was her sister, which they just talked to each other. Then her sister got a call from a friend which she said to join them. 2 minutes later her friend turned up. This was in the space of 5 minutes and I had just brought a drink so wanted to finish it but felt it was too weird. Got up to leave and they asked if I could buy both the girls drinks. I said sure. Went round to the bar and then just walked out. Didn't feel like I needed to explain myself. It was in my second date with the girl. She invited me to the movies. When we were waiting for the movie to start she reads a message in her phone, and with a beautiful smile tells me my parents are joining us for the movie. I want to introduce you. Maybe they will invite you to Christmas. It was August in a fucking second date. Then I told her that I was not interested on meeting her parents and that I was going home. I went on date a few years ago and this was a girl I met on Tinder, before it became a god-awful app. I was seated next to the bar and I was chatting with the bartender before my date had arrived and let her know I was waiting on someone for a first date. When my date arrived we sat in the same spot. We ordered dinner and it was apparent to me right off the bat she only cared about herself. After about 15 minutes of my date talking without asking a single question I decided I was going to let this entertain me and see how long this could go on. It was 2 hours and 15 minutes later, no exaggeration, where she still hadn't asked me a single question. When she got up to go to the bathroom, the bartender came over and said, "I am covering your tab. Now get out of here, and next time you come in we'll have a laugh about this date of yours." So, I got up and left. My date had then proceeded to send me nasty texts for the next couple of days. Apparently the restaurant still charged her for her drinks, meal. I never did go back and chat with that bartender though, wish I had. Matched with her on Tinder and we bonded over our shared love of food. She mentioned not having gone to any good restaurants in town and was tired of places like Kelsey's or Lone Star. Decided to take her to a really nice place in town as I had just got my tax returns and could afford a $200 meal. During the date she talked with me and was engaged right up to when she ordered her food, an appetizer, wine, dinner, a second dinner for lunch the next day and dessert. After her order was placed she took out her phone and spent the next 20 minutes just browsing Instagram while I tried to talk with her. Excused myself to the bathroom and instead talked to the waitress. Got her to cancel my meal and dessert. Only had my appetizer at that point. Split the bill and paid what the 20% tip for the whole thing would have been, as it wasn't fair for the waitress to lose out on her tip. My phone blew up about 5 minutes later when the waitress told her what was up. See, the funny thing is, I have no problem paying for a date even if there isn't a spark if my date at least is engaging, respectful. But being used for a free meal, nah, fuck that. There are more deserving people with less in the world that I'd rather give back to. She ordered lunch for the next day. The hell kind of cheapskate shit is that? It wasn't so much a date, but I was at a party at a friend's house in my early 20s and hit it off well with one of their friends. She and I were talking and dancing all night. Towards the end of the night we were cuddled up on the couch and I was getting ready to kiss her when she said, "I'm so glad you're here to keep me company. I've been so lonely since my husband was deployed." She had not mentioned being married until that point and I literally pushed her off of me and noped right out of there and never looked back. Slite. Raged at the waiters and servers for cutting a piece of meat wrong. Raged at me for trying to help. I apologized to the waiters and bailed, leaving her with the bill. TLDR at the bottom. Here's a disaster of a date where I eventually took her home. Worst date ever. She was a 10 out of 10, intelligent, and works at a big tech company that you all know. Funny part is, as we were getting to know each other, through text, she initially declined me when I asked her out. In her words, "You probably wouldn't like me anymore." And she was right. First, she asked me to pick her up. She lived 30 min from me and about 45 minute from the baseball game we were going to. No big deal. Except when I arrived at her place, she wasn't ready at all. She led me to her living room, and asked me to wait there while she returned to her room to finish getting ready. Her roommate got home, apologized for my date taking so long, and had a couple of drinks with me while we waited. For over an hour. I probably should have left then, but I was having fun with the roommate. She was cool. Once my date was finally ready, I still had to make the drive to the game, and by the time we got there, the game was over halfway done. The seats were wonderful, right by the field with an amazing view. And all she did was take a million selfies, stare at her phone, and complain. Complain about the weather, complain about the crowd, complain about the game. After about 30 minutes, I stood up and told her, "I'm taking you home." We drove the 45 minutes back to her house without saying a single word to each other. She managed to squeak out a "thank you, bye" as she left my car. And we never spoke again. TLDR. Girl made us extremely late to a baseball game only to be on her phone and complain the whole time. I took her back home not long after arriving to the game. It was the most awkward 45-minute ride in complete silence. I gambled on a fart walking into the restaurant. I had to fake an emergency phone call just so I could go home and change my poopy underwear. Dude acted like a homeless man that we were passing on the street must scare me and he needed to cover me, and save me. He did that while exclaiming his distaste for those people. I was out after that. I got catfished by a girl who has sent me fake photos. And it wasn't even close to her. She immediately addressed this, but in a way that would make it my fault if I had an issue with it, if that makes sense. Like, I know I lied about how I look, but only because I knew you wouldn't date me and looks are superficial. No problem. Let's see who she really is. I wish that was the reason I ran for the hills. She invited like 7 of her friends as consultants or advisors, and told me to pretend they weren't there. sitting around at a huge table at Toronto's old spaghetti factory. All the while she's asking them advice while we're on a date. Like if I asked her, "What do you do for fun?" She would then turn to her friends and ask them what she should say. After the hardest convo of my life, she then asked if I wanted to watch some special edition Harry Potter with director commentary or something with all her friends at her house. I made up some random emergency and we never spoke again. I went on a date with someone obsessed with Europe. He was born there and raised in the States, just like I was. He lived there for 9 months recently, too. He kept talking about Europe, his acting career, school, and every question I asked him turned into a long-winded response. I made it 20 minutes before I took a long bathroom break and figured out what to do. I came back. He kept talking about Europe and how Americans don't have culture. He kept putting down Americans and called the people we graduated with try-hards. I told him I'm tired and had to leave. He asked more into why I was leaving so soon and if it was him. I told him I didn't think we shared the same views. He was a bit, understandably defensive, but I insisted on leaving. The whole thing lasted 45 minutes. We had a very polite, very attentive African American waitress, and this girl was dropping racist digs every time she would leave the table, so I just told her she was kind of a piece of shit, so I paid the bill and left. Slite. You know, a guy the first once dated could compete for the world's most interesting man, i.e. very handsome, from a premier university, spoke 6 languages fluently, was a freelance writer for an international news source and a freelance photographer for the National Geographic, etc. He told me that he once was on a date with a woman who didn't try to get to know him at all and, while on the date, was swiping on Tinder. He said that he had a full beer in front of him, drank the whole thing in one gulp, left cash on the table for his drink, and walked out without saying anything. Like, what's the point of going on a date if you aren't going to get to know the other person at all? He started rapping, loudly and poorly, to no beat, that I could hear anyway. The first half of the date was so normal that when he started his freestyle, I was convinced cameras were going to pop out and tell me I was on a hidden camera show. After the 6 most mortifying minutes of my life, I stood up, put my hand over his mouth and told him I was gonna call it a night. He continued to rap under my hand and I got my purse and left. The last text I got, and ignored, was, "Sorry for the awkward situation, worst date ever." Not a first date, but happened a few years ago. We were hooking up for a while and this was maybe the 5th time. She was cool, good kisser and overall a great date. But we've never had sex or anything to that point. So this time we were making out inside my car. She was playing with my pecker and so I thought to retribute the favor. I fingered her for about 10 seconds and felt a weird odor. Just like a gentleman, I took my hands out of her pants and did the good old, "Let me smell my finger while I hug her." Holy shit. That was the nastiest smell I've ever felt in my life. My nostrils were burning like a shot o' whiskey. I immediately gave an excuse that I had to go to X place and that I forgot. The whole way home my car was smelling and my steering wheel as well. I swear. I almost threw up. And had to clean that shit with alcohol. A few years later she calls me asking what happened that day cause it was weird. I was off guard and gave the best, worst excuse that I was still in love with my ex at the time and that felt weird, that's why I left. Well, I wasn't. Damn. That's a hard question to be asked. I'm one of those people who would have answered that question honestly, and someone needed to tell her, but I get how you weren't comfortable being that someone. Look, I promise I'm not trying to be rude, but I was literally repulsed by the smell of your vagina. She got upset that I wasn't vegan and talked about how much she loves herself and no one deserves her. Edit. There's more to this. She spent an hour talking about how she dumped her previous ex to pursue different types of physical love, and was keen on being in a relationship where only she could experiment with other people as it was her right and women were oppressed far too long to be in one relationship. She seems to be doing okay last I checked. I think she works at a bee honey shop now. Slite. Drove from Michigan to Ohio, about 45 minutes, to meet up with this girl. We meet at a restaurant and before going in she asks if we can smoke some weed. Me being me, I said of course. We start driving around and smoking a blunt and this chick tells me she's drunk. So some chick I just met is driving me around drunk, while we smoke weed. I love a girl that breaks the law but not like this. I definitely should have left then, but I drove 45 minutes, so I'm gonna eat. So we go back to the restaurant and we sit down and order drinks. When we go to order our food, she screams what at the top of her lungs for reasons unknown. When the food arrives, she eats the food so ferociously that sour cream gets all over her hair. After we finish eating, this chick tells me I gotta support her if we get together and was asking how much I make and saying she needs someone to make double her salary. I got up and left. She messaged me for the next 24 hours and was trying to win me back with promises of sex. I told her I had my hand and he's not a drunk. Hell yeah, that was savage, haha. I met this girl at the gym. We never really talked until one day she asked me to spot her on the squat rack. We ended up talking for a good minute that time. We end up going out to the bar club scenes in the area. We got a few drinks and started to hit it off until she started taking about her exes. She kept going on about the different guys, how she would work out then sleep with them and be tired from the workout. Thing is, I knew those guys because we went to the same gym. I literally woke up from my buzz and got immediately turned off. Got myself an Uber and went home. I'd DK if she realized why I left but kept raging about how it's her past and it shouldn't affect anything. But she doesn't realize she kept going on about every single person I have seen her with for nearly the whole night. Normally I wouldn't care, but seriously. Why are you bringing them up on date 1? She was pregnant, which actually I was totally okay with. Ladies growing babies need social lives too. But then she had a cider. Okay, I'll be open-minded. Some doctors say you can have a glass of wine, right? Then she had a whiskey. Then she lit a cigarette. Then I left. Took her to my company's Christmas party. Everything seemed fine until we went upstairs with a few people to partake in smoking. Upstairs there was a chalkboard people had written messages and such on. Out of nowhere she got up, drew a swastika and announced, "Fuck the Jews," with a giant grin on her face. I ushered her out and called her a cab. We referred to her as that racist chick thereafter. She casually referred to our waitress as the N-word. I said nothing, stood up and left. Plenty of catches in good OLPA, but she was not one of them. Honestly, it wasn't much of her fault. We had our first date at a cafe. She dropped all her fake nails on my food. Spilled sauce on me. And maybe she was nervous, but she just came off as super speedy. Texted my mate to come by the cafeteria and get me out of there.